Well, Washington, D.C., U Street became the venue. U Street was sort of like a mixture of Amsterdam Avenue, New York, and Wall Street. It was the Black Wall Street, it was the Black Business Street. And of course, you had to start at Howard Theater up the street. Brought all the great shows there. Cab Calloway, Miss Lena Horne. You must say Miss Lena Horne. Miss Lena Horne will play there.
You could be from Northeast and go to school there, and everybody goes to Howard Theater. You could be from uptown by Walter Reed, where the doctors and lawyers' kids lived, and you'd know about Cotillion, you'd know about Punch and Judy, but you'd be at the Howard Theater.
U Street is referenced as Black Broadway because in the 20s and 30s, there were a stretch of theaters and music venues that catered to the Black community in Washington, D.C.
True Reformer hall right up the street, and the True Reformer was a Masonic lodge, but in the afternoons they would play basketball. Basketball came here very early by E.B. Henderson, a black man from Washington who brought black basketball to Black Washington. And the guys and girls would play the games in the daytime. In the afternoon, they play against the Howard University Big Five. And then after the games, they would clean the floor and they'd have the big concerts. And Duke Ellington and others would stay there. And Duke Ellington often says, I thought I was going to be an athlete, but all the girls like the piano player, and I ain't been no athlete since. So Duke Ellington, of course, Duke Ellington was the great man of words. And so he had people like that in U Street all up and down. Club Cavaza, a Club Ballet, many clubs, including Bohemian Cabinet. Blacks could not go and sit down at first. The blacks could entertain, so there was a struggle for, for integration there too.
Black people had businesses and they had financial means. Industrial Bake was right down the street. You had Lee's Flower Shop, Ben's Chili Bowl, a plethora of Black-owned businesses.
Lucky Thompson, Fletcher Henderson, Charlie Parker, all of them played and they recorded here. And then right near here, it was something called the Mechanics Hall. And they had a big hall right here that was started on U Street where they would play the big concerts here. And then one, I think in 1947 or 48.
DC was able to have an area of Black people that had the financial resources to be able to pay for top tier entertainment like this. The theater was built in 1921 and opened in 1922. So to kind of just give it a reference, this was over 30 years before Brown versus Board of Education and the desegregation of schools. So DC, even though it's kind of considered northern, things were still segregated in Washington, DC, and the theater was built with the intent of serving a Black audience. It was built as a movie house, and at the time, Black people didn't have access to first-run movies. So when this establishment was built, they had not only access to see the films, but they also had career opportunities as well. Lincoln kind of being the center, so one of the nicknames that it received was the Jewel of U Street, and based on what I've researched, it seems like that kind of came from that upgrade with the colonnade and the ballroom, and the level of elegance that was brought to the venue. Franklin Roosevelt would have some birthday parties at the colonnade, and there are actually some pictures that show Black and white people at the party having fun together, which at the time was pretty unheard of. I've had conversations with Mrs. Virginia Ali, who started Ben's Chili Bowl with her husband, and elegant is a word that she's always using when she talks about her experiences in coming to the Lincoln. A serious effort was made to make sure that the people who were patrons here did not feel like they were second-class citizens or getting something that was less than what they would have gotten at another venue. So I think a lot of effort went into that, and it showed, and because of that effort, it made it not only a positive experience for the patrons, but also a positive experience for the performers that were presenting their craft.
There were two long-running clubs, Bohemian Cabins, which is right down the street, which had been a Bohemian Cabins, which existed for decades. and brought top musicians in the world.
It was the evening destination, the weekend destination for people to have fun and relax after working, and after dealing with the challenges of being in a segregated community. Really impacted not only the lives of the people then, but people's grandmothers and great-grandmothers tell them stories still to this day about their experiences that they had on this strip that we call Black Broadway.
Well, during the riots, with Mrs. Ali, Mrs. Virginia Ali, the great lady of Washington, they would put a song, say, Soul Brothers. They'd put the picture in the window because there were only 3 or 4 black businesses that were exist. And as I walk up and down Washington now, up U Street now, I see businesses, but I see very small. I see hairdressers, maybe a clothes shop, but nothing that's really employing a lot of people that we would want. But the riots pretty much decimated the area. The 3 places that lasted were Ben's Chili Bowl, Rick's Flower Shop, and Industrial Bank. They are still here, thank goodness. But many businesses are forced to close. Black people could not get lines of credit when the Jewish or the Italian or the Greek people moved out from that, so they never could buy the place. But U Street was that place, and then it stayed pretty much barren until the subway came, and it brought it back. It brought, the Reeves Building and many other places like that.
It's 1960. You had to sell a door with Nancy Wilson. You had Blues Alley with Arthur Prysock, or 13th and Rhode Island at the fancy apartments that had clubs in. Mr. Wise, Richard Groove Homes, Northeast. Rockies over at Benning Road. This is your parents, and that's all you could hear. No profanity, no pants off your butt. You listen to this, then all of a sudden you start hearing melodies, and to this day, the greatest voice I ever heard was Sarah Vaughan, top, bottom octaves. Then here comes Nancy. Then here comes Ella Fitzgerald, but oops, somebody let Phyllis Hyman go to Blues Alley.
Blues Alley was that one of the oldest jazz venues in the country. You have Roberta Flack, who's from DC, who graced that stage. You have Nancy Wilson. She's not from DC, but she's legendary. You have Angela Bofield. All these voices that hit the stage. That was kind of like, and is still one of the places you want to attend, you want to go there, you want to be in the audience just to know that all those people have graced, that stage.
There's a DJ that Bob King, he was on United Broadcasting Company. Richard Eaton had that. Urban, first breakout like before Donnie Simpson and those guys. They picked up a TV station, 5321 First Street, right off North Capitol and Missouri. It was an unusual thing because it was UHF. So not only did you have to have a TV UHF or have a friend, you'd race home to hear the latest songs and these kids from all over, these tribal kids in one place. The name of the show was Teenarama. The particular show was an offshoot from the Teenarama radio show that Bob King had. 2 or 3 o'clock, the major artists are down the street getting ready. Come in on Sunday, last show, Monday's a holiday, load in. Tuesday's the first show. Jackie Wilson, Gladys Knight, James Brown, Temps, whoever it is or whatever, that string of artists are rehearsing. But before that first show, that early show, the first time in, they let the people in, you pay little or nothing and go in and you see some of the greatest entertainers of all time. So what happens after they sound check or whatever, Bob King sends, because they're on the radio, you gotta have a hit record, but you gotta go through Bob because he's the DJ. And that's like with all DJs. Bob has access to every artist. So when you go home and rush home, you go over to your friend's house, do your homework or whatever, you're watching Otis Redding, Diana Ross and the Supremes, all of them, because they wanted the appearance. Everybody was accepted for the music and loved the music. And here's a TV show with all your dreams. You know the biggest dream? To be on the show. You know a bigger dream than that? Turn into a personality and be one of the regulars. You're from Coolidge, you from Dunbar, you from Spingarn. We got representatives of all the schools and all the music. And then the greatest thing that happened, Miles Long, the sandwich place, was one of the sponsors. So they put the sandwich out, and when they do the commercial, they pick somebody out of the audience, a boy and a girl. But you at home drooling. So what do? Everybody wants to be on the show, be a regular, and eat the sandwich. The crown jewel for the 60s for a multitude of people was a boat that held close to 3,000 people. It was the Wilson Line. Some of the greats were on there. Soul Searchers when they first started, the Temptations. So, you know, your church would sell tickets, this person would sell tickets, and everybody on a Sunday or whatever the day was that the event was, would be excited because that was the one thing. The biggest show is stand at the pier, everybody's on the boat, and here come the guys with slick shoes on trying to get on, and they take a chance and jump. You always root for them, but you kind of wish somebody fell in the water for excitement. One whole Mecca. Your parents at that time had parties at the house, maybe a rent party, all based around the music. So let's say, as far as tribal, cabaret. Your church, your social 25, where the men would have, you know, kind of upscale clubs and Cadillacs and say, well, it's 25 of us, so we're social 25, or revolving 15. So that way, the music was central to everybody. And then uptown, if you were from Northwest and you went to an event, you might go to a place that's another known place, which was Burn Manor. It was Knights of Columbus Hall. Some of the biggest entertainers, and that was pretty much a small cabaret on Monday nights. Everybody had a job, everybody was a GS2, everybody had a central charge card, and on Monday night, if you didn't get over there to that place, you couldn't get in. Soul Searchers were the opening act, or the little act in between two major acts. One of the acts, and I'm giving you as we're going through the city. Now I'm riding in a raggedy car, so you gotta bear with me. We might not make it all the way. Tommy Van and the Professionals, they broke up to be Echo. So there's two major groups performing, and in the middle is a little teeny band called Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, just the Soul Searchers. That was the main part of it. So wherever Chuck was, wherever the tribal was, everybody was there. Now, you go in tribal and you at Burn Manor, you can't forget why the boat and where it was going. What was the excitement? Temptations on there. One time, unfortunately, they threw somebody overboard. One time the piano went, but that's a good party. On each dance floor, and those that are listening that are still alive to remember, upstairs, downstairs, one act, one downstairs. In the hallways, going up the step to stairwell were the bartenders. One big fat guy, one kind of fat. They had half pints in there. So you get the whole picture there. Sunday, the liquor store's closed, you can buy a half pint, and you're on the boat to go to Marshall Hall. The Six Flags, the Kings Dominion of the 60s. All black, down in Po Monkey, down on the other side of Marshall Hall. And the Ferris wheel, one big rickety Ferris wheel. This, that, the urban kind of, you know, Afrocentric, because you didn't go to Carr's Beach, was another tribal. All the tribes meet at Carr's Beach. Sparrows Beach, Wilmer's Park, James Brown, Baby Washington, Dinah Washington, all of those people, Jackie Wilson. So you were tribal, you were hands-on, and the music was in the center of it. You had Rock Creek Park, and Fridays and Saturdays, the show was free and Roy Ayers was free. John Lucy and Shy Lights, free. Park Service paid for that. Now, eventually what came to be is, I don't want to go to Fort DuPont. I don't want to. They had one policeman, 2 park police for those thousands of people, because that was sacred music ground. Marine Marching Band outside in the summertime, Lincoln Park, drum and bugle corps, just grinding in this little urban city, you know, that you don't have a vote. You know, so that's catching. Now, you can kind of feel that DC thing.
Anything that makes the art available to the people, I'm a big fan of. So whether it's a show or Shakespeare or music outside for the people, I'm always going to be a fan of. And then there's places outside of town like Wolf Trap that have continued to host us in these outdoor spaces. And so the more that we can do that, the better. And you know, as time goes on and some venues sadly then only live in our memory and don't you know, they aren't places we can go to anymore, we hold on to those memories of that we forged there with our friends and neighbors, and so I think fondly of those places.
DC is a funk town, soul, R&B, and we had started having the large influx of people from the African diaspora in the Caribbean. So we had the funk side, which was Budweiser Superfest, and all the Globe poster events that were promoted by Dimensions Unlimited. And I was still relatively young, so I could go to like the Budweiser Superfest because those were more family things. But like when Rick James came to town, you couldn't go because I remember the local, you know, back then they said reefer, the guy who sold reefer, he knew when certain bands came to town, he had to increase his inventory because people knew they were going to a party that weekend. And so, but you know, as a little child, you kind of hear all these things and you see people going to and fro and you're like excited because, you know, there's an energy in the air. And I remember what a big deal, like I said, the Blackbirds being a Howard band and like Rock Creek Park, that song being a huge hit on the radio. And then it was nothing more surreal or like people say in the 2020s now, meta, than being in Rock Creek Park at the little park where you can kind of drive through Rock Creek and people would kind of hang out there and hearing that song coming off of the radio. Because people, you know, this is pre-boombox. People would have to blast the music out of their cars. And hearing multiple cars playing that song in Rock Creek Park while people danced to it. And I was like a young kid, and I remember the guy my mom was dating at the time, you know, that's what we would do on Sundays. Let's go down to Rock Creek Park, and you would just see black people in the groves, in the little park areas, and you might not know them, but you could pull up and say, hey, how you doing? It might be somebody who knew somebody you knew, or a lot of the guys who had been to Vietnam were around. So it was always somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, or where you from? Oh yeah, you know, Lil Earl over. And so just kind of that community.
You could have concerts at DuPont Circle and just big open air concerts all the time. We don't have them as much now. The Howard Theater, it came back to do great things, but I'm afraid it's faltered. The Lincoln Theater, all those theaters that used to be open to the public and reasonable seats there. So the Kennedy Center is still there if you can afford it, but if you can afford it.
When I'm big, you know, when you're a little kid, you say, when I get big, I'm gonna go to Breezes, I'm gonna dance to Rare Essence, you know, and I'm gonna go to the parties. And so we would go to the Kitty Go-Go's at the fire stations, and at the skating rinks, you know, and you see bands like Rare Essence, Pump Blenders, Air Raid was my favorite band, Petworth, Band and Show, Icy Hot, Hot Cold Sweat, all these bands that, you know, came out on the TTED label and the DETT label, which was TTED spelled backwards. So this black record label, Max Kidd, he had this label, and he had TTED, which was a go-go label, and he had DET, which was also a go-go label, but it was for, I guess, his more experimental imprint. You know, and this was happening. I didn't kind of realize it until I was older what was going on. And then there were and this is kind of like late 70s going into the early 80s where, you know, at my age I was in middle school, and going to see the movie Good to Go. If you've never seen the movie Good to Go, there was a very, you know, that was the era of kind of like the rapsploitation, you know, it was kind of like the follow-up to blaxploitation, so they had all these interesting hip-hop films coming out of the New York hip-hop scene, which I was also adjunct to because my father lived in Brooklyn, so I would spend time with him. But in DC, they said, oh, we can get go-go in on this because it was a popular black art form. So they made one movie about go-go called Good to Go. This white journalist goes into the world of go-go and it's told through his eyes. And the movie wasn't, you know, good. Because movies back then, the production values were just, you know, it's like, let's aim a camera at people and give them some stilted dialogue to say, and, you know, we'll let the music carry the movie. And that's what happened in all these music movies from that era. The music carried you, because the plots and the acting were, you know, middling at best. But being excited to see Trouble Funk, who I can't forget, and EU in these movies, you know, I saw them at the Senator Theater on Minnesota Avenue. Me and my buddies rode our bike. It was very, you know, for millennial viewers, it's very Stranger Things. You kind of get on your bike and ride 3/4 of a mile, a mile and a half away from your house and pay $2, you know, and one kid had a chain and a lock, you know, and we lock our bike up so we go watch the movies and we pay our money and we come out and we say, man, that was bad, you know, and just being excited to see representation of your culture on the screen, even if it's not good, it gives you a sense of value in the world.
The 930 Club became this haven and community and home for these people who didn't have anywhere else to go. You know, downtown DC, around 930 and F Streets Northwest in 1980, was not the kind of place that it is today. And at night, there was not a whole lot going on other than these dance clubs and nightclubs. And so you'd have people coming from the suburbs and from all parts of the city to enjoy the same kind of music for what was kind of the first time. And you'd have these matinee shows during the day where punk and go-go musicians would come together and do headlining sets back to back for audiences of kids.
So if you were 12 or 13, you could go hear, you know, Trouble Funk. You could also hear Black Flag and Minor Threat, you know, and Bad Brains. You know, and people don't really talk about that, but it was kind of like for the black kids who were, the kids from the hood, it was you would meet people who didn't live in the city. You meet kids from Herndon and, you know, Chantilly and Rockville who come down into town, Tacoma Park, and you had kids from who lived in, you know, Arthur Capper houses going to hear Trouble Funk.
It really became this community that has stemmed all of these memories that bleed through until today, and that's why we're still here today. It doesn't get to still be around without the black audiences and the black musicians of Washington, D.C. I mean, we're in this hallway here, which is lined with posters from all over those eras, and you've got like classic musicians from all the way back in the day, like Al Green, and then of course you've got George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and you've got Bad Brains, and all of these artists that are coming together over decades to build the social and musical fabric of DC. Part of the community of the 930 Club has been the staff and the people and the audiences and the artists that come back time after time. And that's because DC is friendly to them and we're friendly to them. So you get artists like George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic that have played the 930 Club, both the original and the quote-unquote new, which is next door, and has been there since 1996. They've been there 31 times. And they just keep coming back. We're here now at the Atlantis, which is that recreation of the original 930 Club, and George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic were part of that core 44 grand opening series that we did in May of 2023. And so that history and that legacy and that connection that they have to local audiences and to the 930 Club as a brand and as a place is just core to everything. When the 930 Club was beginning to outgrow its roots at the original 930 and F Street location, they were looking for what was going to be their next and bigger home, and that was found in the former WUST Music Hall, which is at 815 V Street Northwest, and that is the current home of the 930 Club. If you look up when you're walking down the street, you'll still see that radio antenna lit up on the top of the roof, and that building was built for Duke Ellington in the 40s. So it's been for music through and through its entire life, but it's also watched U Street sort of rise and fall from being Black Broadway through the riots and now through sort of the rejuvenation of the community with all of the different music venues that live on U Street today. And the 930 Club moving in 1996 and the Lincoln Theater reopening in 1995, I think that the through line there is the rejuvenation of music in the city, but it's also the fact that it was becoming more accessible for people. You know, the U Street Metro had just opened. It meant that people from all over the city and the DMV could come here more regularly and more easily. And I think that that willingness to go out into the city again and go to more shows and for the community to come together was a key part of making U Street become the hub that it used to be again.
Folks in the DC area are really fortunate to have so many incredible musical venues, and it's an audience that likes to go to shows, that likes to get out, that loves artistry, and so it's definitely a hub on the East Coast for artists to stop through. Institutions like Howard here, like the Kennedy Center here, like so many of the venues that have really been pillars of the community in terms of music here in DC. That's a significant part of what has kept DC a vital contributor along musical and other creative lines.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at WHUT.org. Thank you.